Officer Brent Collar thought he owned the city. With a badge on his chest and hate in his heart, he led brutal raids against the homeless, especially targeting black men no one would miss. To him, Jameer Dawes was just another shadow on the street, another nameless body to disappear. But Collar was wrong. Because Jameer isn't just a homeless man. He's a former Delta Force commander, trained to survive, built to fight, and ready to expose the truth. People have been vanishing without a trace, and Collar is at the center of it. What he doesn't know is that the man he tried to crush is about to become the city's reckoning. This time, justice isn't knocking, it's coming through the door. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. In the heart of a city that gleamed brightly to tourists, yet cast harsh shadows upon its forgotten souls, Jameer Dawes had learned the rhythm of survival, a subtle dance between silence and invisibility. Beneath towering skyscrapers, their glass windows reflecting a sky indifferent to suffering, Jameer moved through alleys filled with discarded dreams, cardboard shelters, and the muffled cries of those whose stories were buried beneath layers of grime and despair. At 47, Jameer's beard had grown peppered with gray, his rugged face etched with lines that spoke silently of battles fought long before these cold streets became his home. Once regarded as the deadliest operative in Delta Force, feared by enemies and revered by comrades, Jameer had now mastered the quiet art of staying unnoticed, wrapped in worn clothes and weathered dignity, his sharp eyes carefully hidden beneath the hood of a tattered jacket. Only his muscular build and the grace of his movement hinted at the formidable man he used to be. Yet, survival here required more than stealth. It meant constantly navigating the ruthless patrols of Officer Brent Collar and his elite unit, a group whose aggressive methods had recently intensified against homeless communities, particularly targeting black men and women with brutal efficiency. Each night brought new arrests and whispered disappearances, while the city's wealthy slept soundly, blissfully unaware or intentionally blind to the injustice festering in their own backyard. Jameer had witnessed enough brutality in his life to last several lifetimes, had felt the sting of betrayal sharper than the bullets he once dodged, and sought only peace amid the chaos. But even his practiced neutrality was shaken on this bitter evening as he watched from a shadowed corner while police cruisers stormed yet another makeshift camp. Batons raised, voices harsh and devoid of humanity. Zeke, an elderly man whose gentle wisdom had often brought solace to Jameer during their long conversations beside barrel fires, stood defiantly but frail among the chaos, his body trembling against the cold. For the first time in years, Jameer felt the pulse of his old instincts, the same instincts that once guided him fearlessly through battlefields, and something stirred fiercely within his chest, an anger he could no longer suppress. As Zeke crumpled beneath the heavy blows, Jameer's fingers tightened into fists, his heart beating a defiant rhythm against the apathy forced upon him. In that frozen moment, beneath the indifferent gaze of the city lights, Jameer Dawes silently vowed that this night would be different. The shadows, long his refuge, would now become his weapon. Officer Brent Collar stepped out from his cruiser, his polished boots grinding against the gritty pavement beneath the cold glare of street lamps. He drew a slow breath, savoring the authority he wielded over this neglected corner of the city, a place society preferred to ignore. At 39, Collar had grown accustomed to the comforts his badge afforded him: power, control, and most of all, the freedom to act upon his own biases. Tonight, as always, his prejudices guided his hand, and his eyes scanned the makeshift tent city with thinly veiled contempt. The encampment was dimly lit by scattered fires and flickering lanterns, casting long, misshapen shadows of weary souls trying to rest. A cluster of tents formed a fragile refuge for dozens of homeless men and women, many black, many already victims of a system designed to forget them. Collar gave a curt nod to his men, who swiftly descended upon the settlement with calculated brutality, tearing away canvas shelters, overturning precious belongings, and scattering those who fled with no time to gather their meager possessions. "Let's clean this mess up," Collar barked to his fellow officers, his voice dripping with disdain. "Round them all up, and you know exactly who we're looking for. Leave the rest. We're not running charity." Jameer Dawes stood quietly near the fringes of the encampment, the shadows providing only thin protection against the intrusive police lights. His muscles tensed instinctively as he watched officers storm through the settlement, aggressively kicking aside the tents and belongings of the black occupants while callously ignoring those with lighter skin. A middle-aged woman pleaded with the officers for mercy as they dragged her husband away, only to receive harsh laughter and mocking imitations of her cries. Beside Jameer, Zeke shifted nervously, his old eyes clouded with despair. The elderly man had lived too many decades to believe things might change, yet witnessing the open cruelty remained agonizingly painful. Zeke placed a frail hand on Jameer's shoulder, sensing the anger that simmered beneath the surface. "Easy now," Zeke cautioned gently, his voice a whisper. "Don't let them bait you." From behind the police line, a small gathering of journalists stood watching passively, cameras held idly at their sides, lenses aimed downward, microphones silent. It was a familiar betrayal, one Jameer had come to expect from a city desperate to sanitize its image. Zeke followed his gaze, sighing deeply. "They see us as invisible, Jameer, maybe even less." Zeke whispered bitterly, shaking his head. "They look, but never really see." Across town, away from the chaotic destruction beneath the bridge, Detective Nina Greaves watched the evening news from her cluttered desk at the precinct. At 41, Nina had earned her reputation as meticulous and incorruptible, traits that set her apart in a department increasingly hostile to questions and scrutiny. She watched silently as news anchors briefly mentioned the successful removal of a dangerous homeless encampment, before quickly moving to lighter fare. Frustrated, Nina rewound security camera footage from her computer, carefully observing the violent police actions that never made it to the screen. Her heart tightened, recognizing Officer Collar in the center of it all. She'd been gathering evidence, quietly and methodically, sensing something deeply wrong at the core of these raids. An agenda that twisted justice into cruelty. Yet her superiors refused to listen, and whispers had reached her ears of pressure from powerful, unseen forces. Back at the shattered encampment, Jameer knew the older man was right. His life depended on staying invisible, silent, unnoticed. But tonight it felt unbearably difficult. His fists clenched involuntarily as he saw Officer Collar personally dragging a frightened young black man from a tent by his shirt collar, tossing him roughly onto the pavement. "You people never learn, do you?" Collar sneered at the terrified young man sprawled on the ground. "We clean you out. You crawl right back. It's like rats. You're all the same." Jameer's jaw tightened, every muscle in his body urging him forward. Yet, discipline held him still, the painful internal struggle visible only in the hardening lines of his face. As Collar's men continued to single out the black residents, a younger officer named Jackson caught sight of Jameer, lurking quietly in the darkness. The rookie officer approached swiftly, flashlight beams stabbing into Jameer's eyes, temporarily blinding him. "You deaf? Or just dumb?" Officer Jackson snapped arrogantly. "Didn't you hear us tell you to move? Let's go." Jameer's body remained motionless, eyes narrowing calmly, barely masking the intensity beneath. His voice, controlled and steady, carried a quiet strength. "I'm not bothering anyone," Jameer replied quietly but clearly. "There's no reason for all this." Jackson chuckled bitterly, glancing back at Collar, who watched with mild amusement from nearby. "No reason?" Jackson scoffed loudly. "Look around. You people pollute this city. You think you deserve something? Move now, or I'll give you a reason." Jameer's heart pounded faster, his instincts screaming that he was reaching a breaking point. Yet he resisted, striving to control his rising anger. His silence irritated the officer further, emboldening him to step closer. Kohler approached casually, smirking with cold authority, studying Jamir closely for the first time. "Another tough guy," Kohler mocked, deliberately provocative. "You think you're different? You're nothing special. Just another worthless piece of trash living off this city. Move, or I'll personally toss you in the truck myself." Jamir's eyes met Kohler's, unflinching. Years of combat had taught him when confrontation was inevitable, and the tension here was unmistakably building toward violence. Still, he remained calm, measured, his voice edged with quiet defiance. "You're targeting these people," Jamir said evenly, "picking them off because you think nobody will notice." Kohler's eyes widened slightly in surprise at Jamir's boldness, but his expression quickly darkened into hatred. "Oh, trust me, nobody cares," Kohler sneered viciously. "You're invisible. You're all invisible. The sooner you accept it, the easier it'll be. Now, last chance, move, or I'll move you." Nearby, Zeke watched helplessly, knowing Jamir's pride and dignity wouldn't allow him to surrender easily. Zeke stepped forward slightly, pleading softly toward the officers. "Please, officers, he's not harming anyone." "Shut up, old man," Kohler snapped, pushing Zeke aside roughly, knocking him painfully to the ground. Something inside Jamir snapped instantly at seeing Zeke fall. In that moment, the carefully maintained restraint evaporated, leaving only cold, calculated anger. "Don't touch him again," Jamir growled, his voice quiet but dangerously intense. Kohler smiled slowly, his eyes glinting with malicious anticipation. This was exactly the confrontation he'd hoped for. "Or what?" Kohler challenged, stepping forward with two more officers flanking him, hands already hovering over their weapons. Jamir stood firm, knowing there was no turning back now. His fists clenched, adrenaline flooding his veins. The soldier within him had awakened, fierce and ready. "Or I'll make you regret it," Jamir whispered with unshakable resolve, his voice carrying clearly through the now tense silence, setting the stage for the storm that would follow. The night air thickened with tension as Officer Kohler's malicious grin widened, his hand sliding confidently toward his baton. Jamir Dawes stood utterly still, his breaths measured, eyes locked onto Kohler's every move. The officers beside Kohler took positions instinctively, sensing the confrontation was inevitable, their fingers twitching toward their weapons, ready for violence. "You really want to do this?" Kohler taunted softly, stepping forward with calculated menace. "You think you've got something special, tough guy? I've put down 100 like you." Jamir said nothing, his silence an unspoken challenge. But the tipping point was not Kohler's arrogant threat. It was Zeke's soft groan of pain from the pavement, the elderly man's dignity crushed beneath Kohler's boot. Jamir's instincts, honed by decades of lethal precision, snapped into sharp clarity, time itself slowing to a crawl around him. Kohler moved first, swinging his baton swiftly toward Jamir's ribs. In a blur of motion, Jamir sidestepped effortlessly, pivoting gracefully as the baton sliced empty air. He caught Kohler's wrist in an iron grip, twisting sharply downward. A sickening crack echoed through the silent crowd as Kohler screamed in agony, collapsing onto one knee. Seeing their leader fall, Officer Jackson lunged forward recklessly, attempting to tackle Jamir from behind. Jamir anticipated the attack, stepping aside at the last second and driving his elbow forcefully into Jackson's jaw. The impact shattered teeth and dropped Jackson to the pavement, unconscious and bleeding. Two more officers rushed forward simultaneously, clubs raised high, driven now by fury and embarrassment. Jamir spun, narrowly dodging their heavy blows, his training evident in the lethal efficiency of his counterattack. He seized one officer's baton mid-swing, wrenching it from his grasp and cracking it sharply across the man's temple. The officer crumpled lifelessly at Jamir's feet. Zeke, still lying helpless on the ground, looked up with blurred vision, reaching weakly toward Jamir. "Jamir," Zeke gasped faintly. "They'll kill you. Get out. While you can." Jamir glanced down briefly, his eyes softening only momentarily. Resolve etched into every hardened feature of his face. "I'm not leaving you, Zeke," Jamir replied fiercely, turning just in time as another officer attempted to strike from behind. Jamir caught the blow with brutal ease, countering swiftly and ruthlessly with a precise punch to the officer's throat, sending him choking and gasping to the ground. Each movement was executed flawlessly, muscle memory from countless battles guiding every action, ensuring he remained always 2 steps ahead of his attackers. But the confrontation was far from over. Sirens wailed in the distance, additional reinforcements swiftly closing in. Collar staggered back to his feet, clutching his injured wrist, his face contorted with raw hatred and humiliation. "Take him down! Do whatever it takes!" Collar spat venomously, his voice shaking with rage. "I want this animal off my streets!" Several officers advanced aggressively, wielding batons and tasers, desperation and fear evident in their eyes. The gathered crowd scattered, screaming and fleeing as the confrontation intensified. Jamir maneuvered skillfully around the parked car, anticipating and dodging each strike with calculated precision, his instincts sharper than ever. Zeke struggled to crawl away, but was brutally kicked aside by one of Collar's reinforcements. Jamir noticed this immediately, a wave of fury blazing within his chest. In an instant, he surged toward Collar, rapidly closing the distance and forcing the officer into panicked retreat. Jamir lunged forward, deftly disarming Collar, knocking his baton from his shaking grasp. The weapon clattered onto the pavement as Jamir drove his fist squarely into Collar's jaw, shattering bone and pride alike, sending the officer sprawling unconscious onto the street. Panting, Jamir quickly turned toward Zeke, who was barely conscious, bloodied and broken, his frail frame trembling beneath the harsh streetlights. "Hold on, Zeke," Jamir urged desperately, kneeling beside him, scanning quickly for an escape route as sirens grew louder. "Stay awake. I'll get us out." But before Jamir could lift Zeke, another wave of officers surged forward, weapons aimed directly at him, their eyes burning with murderous intent. Jamir slowly rose, fists clenched tightly, calculating his next move carefully, each breath heavy with adrenaline and resolve. A dozen weapons trained on him now, Jamir faced down the line of officers defiantly. He recognized he was outnumbered, but retreating would mean leaving Zeke at their mercy, a choice he would not make. For the first time in years, Jamir embraced the warrior he had always been, accepting this fight as one he could not avoid. "I said get down now," an officer roared, voice trembling slightly in fear and confusion at the sheer determination he saw in Jamir's stance. "Don't make this worse." Jamir narrowed his eyes, shifting his stance into an unmistakably combative posture, silently daring them to approach. He felt alive again, dangerously alive, fueled by a lifetime of suppressed rage, injustice, and raw survival instinct. "Come and take me," Jamir whispered fiercely, a quiet challenge slicing clearly through the charged silence. The officers advanced cautiously, batons raised, firearms drawn, unaware they had already underestimated the man before them. A man whose only remaining choice was now to fight. Time slowed to a crawl beneath the cold city lights as Jamir stood, surrounded, fists clenched tightly, every muscle taut with readiness. Around him, a growing circle of police officers approached cautiously, their faces twisted in frustration and anger, weapons aimed and batons held defensively. Jamir's steady breathing echoed calmly in his own ears, heartbeat pounding steadily in his chest, as his sharp, trained eyes scanned for openings, calculating his next strike. "Last chance!" an officer barked harshly, voice trembling slightly, with a mixture of fear and rage. "Put your hands behind your head, or we'll put you down." Jamir didn't respond. He simply shifted his weight slightly forward, feet planting firmly on the pavement, inviting the next attack. He knew negotiation was long past. Now was only the brutal language of survival, and he spoke it fluently. Two officers surged forward simultaneously, clubs slicing through the air with brutal force. Jameer ducked swiftly beneath their swings, countering with precision blows. One fierce jab cracked ribs. Another strike shattered an officer's jaw. Both men collapsed heavily, their screams punctuating the growing chaos. Yet even as Jameer held his own, a sudden, overwhelming blow crashed into his shoulder, followed immediately by another heavy strike to his back, staggering him to one knee. Pain flashed hot through his body, his vision momentarily blurred. "Take him down!" shouted another officer fiercely, swinging again. Jameer managed to catch the incoming strike, twisting savagely, snapping the baton free and driving it back into the officer's stomach, forcing him to crumple helplessly. But even as he rose again, another fist slammed brutally into the side of his face, splitting his lip and filling his mouth with the taste of copper. Nearby, Zeke lay curled helplessly on the pavement, his thin body trembling, bruised and battered. He reached weakly toward Jameer, barely conscious yet aware of the violence unfolding around him. "Stop it!" Zeke pleaded, voice weak but audible above the confusion. "Please, stop hurting him!" An officer turned suddenly toward Zeke, snarling in irritation, kicking him viciously in the ribs again. Zeke's groan pierced Jameer's consciousness deeper than any physical wound ever could, igniting a fresh surge of adrenaline and fury within him. "Leave him alone!" Jameer roared, turning violently toward Zeke's attacker. But before Jameer could reach the officer, another blow crashed down against his back, forcing him forward onto his knees once more. Officers quickly surrounded him, their clubs rising and falling mercilessly. Despite his elite training and hardened physique, the barrage of strikes began to overwhelm him, driving him downward with merciless precision. "Enough of this!" a desperate voice shouted from among the officers. "Cuff him!" But Jameer refused to be subdued, kicking out fiercely, knocking one officer off balance and sending another sprawling. Despite their numbers, the officers struggled to contain him. His defiance enraged them further, escalating their brutality until one panicked officer, eyes wide and hands trembling, drew his weapon. "Stand down!" another officer shouted in alarm, realizing the danger too late. But fear overtook reason. The officer's finger tightened on the trigger, and a single shot rang out, echoing sharply through the night, silencing the gathered crowd that had formed at the edges of the confrontation. A sudden burning agony tore into Jameer's left side, causing him to stumble backward in shock, clutching instinctively at the wound. Warm blood seeped rapidly through his fingers, staining his shirt darkly. For a split second, silence fell, an eerie hush punctuated only by Jameer's heavy breaths. Then, chaos erupted. People screamed, scattering frantically as the echoing gunshot ignited panic throughout the encampment. Officers froze momentarily, shocked at the reckless discharge of a firearm in public view. The shooter stepped back, stunned at his own actions, dropping his weapon to his side. Jameer seized that split second of distraction, adrenaline overriding pain. Survival instincts surged through him once more as he lunged sideways, stumbling toward the shadows between tents, disappearing swiftly into the chaotic darkness. Gunshots rang wildly after him, bullets ricocheting harmlessly as officers shouted frantically, their orders tangled in panic and confusion. Behind him, Zeke was roughly hauled onto his feet, hands bound brutally behind his back, his frail form barely capable of standing. Collar, face swollen and battered, finally recovered enough to issue commands. "Get him in the truck! Move now!" Collar barked furiously, blood trickling from his mouth. "And somebody find that other one." "He can't get far!" Jameer staggered painfully through the darkened alleyways, pressing one hand firmly against the searing bullet wound, his breathing shallow, rapid, uneven. Every step felt heavier than the last, the streets becoming a blurred maze of pain and darkness around him. Yet his military instincts guided him onward, each movement driven purely by sheer will and discipline. Behind him, sirens wailed, police cars racing frantically, lights illuminating buildings and streets in desperate search. But Jamir moved swiftly, melting silently into the dark heart of the city, the pain sharpening his resolve rather than weakening it. His blood stained the streets beneath him, a trail he couldn't afford to leave. Yet, tonight, beneath the agony, beneath the fury at injustice and violence, a deeper clarity was born within Jamir Dawes. He understood now that hiding would never save him or anyone else. This war had found him again, and this time he had no choice but to fight back. Jamir moved swiftly and silently through the city's shadowed alleys, the agony of the bullet wound radiating sharply through his left side, each step a painful reminder of the battle he'd narrowly survived. He pressed his palm firmly over the bleeding, carefully avoiding the beams of flashlights and the glow of police cruisers prowling the streets behind him, their sirens painting the night air with urgency. In mere moments, he'd become a fugitive, hunted relentlessly, his name whispered by officers who called him dangerous, a criminal to be feared, a narrative that rapidly spread through radio channels and news broadcasts. Jamir understood this game. He had lived it countless times before, across oceans and in war zones, hunted by enemies far deadlier and more cunning than the city's police force. Now, the memories returned vividly, flickering through his mind with startling clarity, fragments of past missions blending seamlessly into the present. He remembered nights in the barren deserts of Afghanistan, slipping silently through enemy camps beneath moonless skies, his pulse steady and his mind clear, every decision made between heartbeats. He recalled the dense jungles of Colombia, navigating thick foliage, every shadow and whisper a potential threat. His body attuned perfectly to the rhythms of survival. Those same instincts guided him now, even as blood loss threatened to slow his movements. Jamir's senses sharpened, each sound amplified, each shadow analyzed instantly as he navigated the city's dark underbelly. Turning into a dilapidated district, he spotted an abandoned warehouse. Neglected, forgotten, the perfect sanctuary. He paused briefly, scanning the surroundings for movement, before slipping quietly inside. The warehouse interior was dark, damp, and smelled of decay, rusted metal beams overhead creaking in quiet protest at his intrusion. He quickly barricaded the main entrance, dragging heavy crates against the door, ensuring he wouldn't be easily found. His fingers trembling slightly, Jamir tore fabric from his jacket, binding the bullet wound tightly to halt the bleeding. The searing pain sharpened his focus, his thoughts crystal clear despite exhaustion and trauma. Slumping against a wall, Jamir closed his eyes briefly, breathing deeply to calm himself, letting his instincts take over. Images flooded his mind. The recent brutality, the police aggression, Zeke's battered face as he was dragged away. He had no illusions about the narrative being painted against him. He knew the city's media would not favor truth over convenience. They would label him dangerous, violent, a menace to society. He'd seen it too often in his life. A hero one day, a villain the next. Sure enough, Jamir's suspicions were confirmed when, tuning into a local news broadcast on a discarded radio he found in the warehouse, he heard his own description being shared. Police are searching tonight for Jamir Dawes, described by authorities as a dangerous fugitive. Dawes is accused of violently attacking police officers during a routine operation against illegal encampments. Citizens are urged to report any sightings immediately. Jamir grimaced, disgusted but unsurprised. The truth had become a casualty long ago. But something deeper bothered him. He had fought off police before. He understood brutality and corruption, but tonight's aggression had carried a different undertone, a coordinated, deliberate agenda hidden behind brutality. His analytical mind churned, revisiting details with meticulous clarity. He recalled Zeke's terrified whispers about disappearances, remembered the specific people targeted by Collar and his men. Not random or reckless, but calculated selections. Jameer's eyes narrowed, realization dawning coldly. These were not mere arrests. They were abductions, hidden behind the guise of law enforcement operations. Something sinister lurked beneath the surface, darker and larger than simple police corruption. People were being systematically taken, not simply cleared from the streets. The thought unsettled him deeply, igniting an internal fire that overshadowed even his physical pain. He knew he couldn't remain hidden long, not while innocents continued to suffer in silence. Slowly rising to his feet despite the wound's angry protest, Jameer moved deliberately through the warehouse, using his tactical training to organize his makeshift command center. Old city maps, discarded newspapers, and bits of abandoned equipment were quickly repurposed as surveillance tools. For hours, Jameer meticulously mapped the pattern of raids, marking each location carefully, noting the dates, times, and numbers taken. His pulse quickened, adrenaline mingling with anger as the truth emerged. These were carefully orchestrated sweeps, coordinated with military precision. It wasn't random police brutality. It was organized, systematic abduction. The scale of it shocked even him, a hardened soldier who believed he'd seen humanity's darkest depths. Jameer realized he was now caught in a war unlike any he'd fought before. One waged not on distant soil, but in the very heart of the city he called home. Tonight, he accepted fully what this meant. He would no longer run from it or hide from those hunting him. Instead, he'd become the hunter, using every skill he'd ever learned in service of justice. In the solitude of the warehouse, beneath the glow of a solitary bulb, Jameer Dawes prepared himself mentally and physically for the storm he knew was coming. The pain from his wound faded into quiet resolve as he stared intently at the map before him, his eyes gleaming fiercely. It was time to fight back, and he would do so on his own terms. 3 nights after the raid, beneath the cover of darkness, Jameer moved silently along cracked sidewalks near the warehouse district, his presence a mere whisper in the city's nocturnal shadows. His wound, still raw beneath makeshift bandages, burned insistently with every step, a constant reminder of the price already paid. Yet pain sharpened his senses, anchoring him fully in the present moment, every muscle primed for action. He had spent days quietly gathering intel, uncovering police patrol patterns, and piecing together the brutal choreography behind the city's ruthless campaign. Through hushed conversations and careful observation, Jameer had begun mapping an unsettling rhythm of arrests, noticing precise timings of transport vans and specific locations where people seemed to vanish. Tonight, as Jameer paused in shadows behind an abandoned storefront, tense silence shattered suddenly. Shouts echoed nearby, followed by scuffling footsteps. Carefully edging forward, he peered around a graffiti-covered corner and witnessed 2 officers forcibly restraining a young black man, barely more than a boy. Slim, frightened, eyes wide and desperate for escape, the young man struggled helplessly. "Get your hands off me!" he protested desperately. "I didn't do anything!" "Save it!" one officer growled harshly, tightening the cuffs mercilessly. "You're coming with us!" Jameer's jaw tightened at the sight, memories of Zeke's battered body flashing through his mind like a spark to dry tinder. His breath slowed, heart steady. Then, without a word, he burst from the shadows like a phantom, his body moving with silent precision. He struck the first officer low and fast, a powerful palm driving straight into the man's solar plexus, folding him over with a strangled gasp. Before the man could recover, Jameer followed up with a sharp elbow to the back of his neck, sending him crumpling to the pavement in a heap, out cold before he hit the ground. The second officer spun, startled, a flash of panic crossing his face. He stumbled backward, his fingers fumbling clumsily for his radio. But Jamir was already there. In a blur, Jamir seized the man's wrist, twisting it sharply and wrenching the device from his grasp. The officer cried out, dropping the radio. Jamir used the momentum to flip him over his shoulder with surgical precision, slamming him flat onto his back. The officer groaned, stunned and breathless. Jamir stepped over him swiftly, one hand snapping open the cuffs with a key from the fallen officer's belt, the other hand ready to counter any sudden move. Who are you?" the terrified young man asked, his voice trembling, eyes wide with disbelief as Jamir helped him sit up and worked the restraints free. Jamir didn't answer at first. He looked down at the officers sprawled in the dirt, their uniforms a bitter reminder of the power they'd abused. His voice was calm but low, carved from stone. "Someone who's done watching," Jamir replied firmly, scanning the street warily. "Can you run?" The young man nodded shakily. "Yeah, I'm good. Then follow me." They vanished swiftly into a maze of alleyways, eventually returning safely to Jamir's warehouse hideout. Under dim lighting, the young man finally spoke, voice softened but still shaken. "My name's Andre, but everyone calls me Bird," he explained cautiously, watching Jamir tend to his injury. "I've been running since yesterday. They took me and some others weeks ago, put us in trucks, black vans, told us it was a rehabilitation thing. But it wasn't. It was like prison. Worse." Jamir's eyes narrowed intently. "Tell me everything you saw." Bird took a deep breath, visibly haunted. "They shipped us to some big compound. Guards everywhere. Fences, watchtowers. Made us work till we collapsed. If you slowed down, they beat you. Starved you. Said nobody cared enough to look." Jamir leaned forward, voice calm but intense. "How'd you get away?" Bird's gaze hardened. "Guards slipped up, left a gate open. I ran, didn't stop till I got back here. But they're hunting people down, filling vans every day. They got more than one place. It's bigger than anybody knows." Jamir nodded gravely. It confirmed everything he'd suspected. "They're trafficking people, using the law as cover." Bird swallowed hard, meeting Jamir's steady gaze. "You gotta believe me. Somebody's gotta stop them." Jamir firmly placed a reassuring hand on Bird's shoulder. "I believe you," he assured firmly. "And we will." Over the following days, Jamir meticulously traced transportation routes, documented movements of unmarked vans, and confirmed hidden transfers. Yet he knew this evidence alone wouldn't be enough without someone inside the system who might listen. He needed an ally, someone who questioned authority, who still believed in justice. That opportunity arrived unexpectedly one night as Jamir carefully surveilled a police checkpoint near a city shelter. He noticed a female detective engaged in a tense argument with Officer Collar beneath dim streetlights. Her voice rose, firm and unyielding, carrying easily to Jamir's concealed position. "People are disappearing, Brent," she said sharply. "I've seen the reports. They don't add up." Collar dismissed her coldly. "Detective Greaves, watch your tone. There's nothing to investigate. Back off, or you'll regret it." The detective, clearly frustrated yet unintimidated, turned away, climbing back into her unmarked sedan, leaving Collar staring after her coldly. Jamir watched carefully as she drove away, noting the vehicle number, feeling a glimmer of cautious hope. In the privacy of his hideout, Jamir began researching. Detective Nina Greaves, a veteran officer with a reputation for integrity and relentless pursuit of truth. He pieced together her profile, finding numerous stories of her clashes with corrupt colleagues and superiors. Trust was scarce, but Jamir recognized sincerity when he saw it. 2 nights later, taking careful precautions, Jamir contacted her discreetly, leaving an anonymous message that hinted at his knowledge of the disappearances, along with details only someone deeply involved would know. He arranged a covert meeting beneath concrete pillars of an abandoned overpass. On the appointed night, Detective Greaves arrived cautiously, scanning the shadows. Jamir stepped forward slowly, revealing himself just enough to assure her he meant no threat. "You're the one they're hunting," Nina said quietly. her voice careful but unafraid. Jamir nodded slowly. They made sure I couldn't stay quiet. She studied him thoughtfully. "Why contact me?" "Because I saw you confront Collar," Jamir answered evenly. "You're looking for answers." "I have them." Nina hesitated briefly, her eyes assessing him carefully, finally deciding. "Tell me everything." Jamir handed her carefully documented notes, photographs, and marked maps. "They're taking people, mostly homeless, during late-night sweeps. I've tracked the vans. They never come back the same way. People go in, but I haven't seen anyone come out." Nina flipped slowly through the notes, her brow furrowing as pieces began to align. "This goes higher than I thought," she murmured grimly. "To stop them, we need undeniable proof. Footage from inside, testimonies," Jamir explained firmly. "Can you help?" Nina paused briefly, then nodded resolutely, meeting Jamir's determined eyes. "Yes, but you'll need to go inside." Jamir straightened slowly, voice firm, eyes fierce. "Then that's exactly what I'll do." In that quiet moment, Jamir knew clearly that Detective Greaves was an ally he could trust. Together, they would reveal the truth, no matter the cost. Under the quiet cover of night, Jamir Dawes stood concealed beneath a cluster of trees overlooking the precinct building, its stark walls bathed in the pale amber glow of streetlights. His breath came slow and even, the tension coiled in his muscles tempered by years of elite training. The wound on his side had finally begun healing, a dull ache lingering. But his clarity of purpose overshadowed the physical discomfort. He knew exactly what was required tonight: precision, stealth, and trust in a past he'd hoped never to revisit. Moments later, an old, unmarked sedan idled quietly nearby. Headlights dimmed. Jamir recognized it instantly as Detective Nina Greaves's car. She stepped out cautiously, glancing around nervously before handing Jamir a small keycard and an earpiece concealed within her closed palm. "Use the rear service entrance," Nina instructed quietly. "I've set the cameras to loop for exactly 20 minutes, and the night shift officer on duty stepped out. You won't get a second chance." Jamir nodded appreciatively. "Understood." Nina hesitated, her eyes sharp but wary. "If you're caught, I can't protect you." Jamir met her gaze calmly. "I never expected you to. You've risked enough." She nodded slowly, stepping back to her car. "Good luck." Jamir moved swiftly toward the precinct, keeping low beneath windows as he approached the rear entrance. He swiped Nina's card, holding his breath until the green light blinked softly, admitting him inside. The interior felt oppressively silent, shadows clinging stubbornly to empty desks and locked office doors. He slipped through the corridors with practiced ease, counting his steps precisely, instincts guiding him unerringly toward the records room Nina had identified. Reaching the steel door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," Jamir quickly punched in the provided access code, feeling a brief rush of relief as it unlocked smoothly. The room was cold, sterile, lined with metal filing cabinets and sleek computer terminals. Jamir began searching methodically, rapidly scanning files and folders until a label caught his eye. "Project Clean Sweep." He opened the thick folder and absorbed the contents rapidly, his jaw tightening in disgust. The documents laid bare a secret partnership between the city and a powerful private contractor, Triton Rehabilitation Services, a federally funded company. Beneath official logos and bureaucratic language hid a chilling truth. Homeless citizens were systematically targeted and secretly transferred to off-grid facilities branded as rehabilitation camps, though no genuine rehabilitation existed, only forced labor for profit. Jamir's pulse quickened as he flipped through lists of names, recognition chilling him to his core. Among those recorded was Zeke, marked as processed, yet no official arrest record existed, just as Nina suspected. Anger boiled beneath Jamir's steady facade, but discipline tempered his rage, sharpening his resolve instead. Quickly, Jamir pulled out a small digital scanner Nina had provided, meticulously capturing every page of damning evidence. When done, He returned the folder precisely as he'd found it, leaving no trace of disturbance. Checking his watch, he had less than 5 minutes remaining. Suddenly, footsteps echoed faintly from down the corridor. Jameer froze momentarily, analyzing the approaching pace. Steady, deliberate. Security patrol returning early. Thinking quickly, he slipped silently into a shadowed alcove, pressing tightly against the wall as the guard passed by, unaware of Jameer's concealed presence mere inches away. Once the guard vanished around a corner, Jameer swiftly exited the precinct, slipping into the welcoming darkness outside. An hour later, in the safety of the warehouse hideout, Nina reviewed the scanned documents with Jameer, her expression a mixture of disbelief and deep-seated fury. "Project Clean Sweep isn't just city corruption," Nina said quietly, voice tight with tension. "These camps are federally funded through Triton. They've been covering their tracks by never officially processing detainees. There's no paperwork, no charges, nothing to tie the disappearances back to them." Jameer's gaze remained dark and focused. "And no one questions it." "Exactly," Nina replied gravely. "The victims vanish completely. The public thinks they're transient, unaccountable. No one looks deeper." Jameer clenched his fists tightly, memories of Zeke's battered face vivid in his mind. They underestimated how far someone would go. Nina exhaled heavily, understanding the magnitude of the task ahead. "This evidence is damning, but it won't be enough. We need direct footage, testimonies, undeniable proof from inside." Jameer nodded firmly. "I'm going in. I'll find Zeke and the others, gather the footage. It's the only way." Nina hesitated, genuine concern evident. "If you're captured, I won't be," Jameer interrupted quietly, his confidence unwavering. "I know exactly what I'm facing." She studied his face thoughtfully, seeing clearly the quiet strength that had guided him through a lifetime of battles. "I hope you're right." Jameer offered a brief, reassuring smile. "I've survived worse." Nina gathered her documents, preparing to leave. Before departing, she paused, turning back toward Jameer with sincere respect. "Be careful out there. You're not alone in this anymore." Jameer watched her go, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He turned back to the scattered maps and evidence covering the warehouse walls. Tonight, he'd uncovered the depths of the city's darkest secret. A conspiracy reaching beyond local corruption into the heart of systemic evil. For Jameer Dawes, the mission ahead was clear and personal. It was time to strike back, not just for Zeke or himself, but for every victim whose suffering remained hidden beneath society's indifference. The warehouse echoed softly with exertion, dim lighting casting shadows that danced across cracked concrete walls as Jameer circled Bird slowly, his steps fluid and precise. Bird's brow glistened with sweat, his youthful features determined but strained, breathing heavily as Jameer patiently coached him through each movement. "Again," Jameer commanded calmly, eyes locked sharply onto his student. "Your survival depends on repetition. Hesitation will cost you everything." Bird nodded, steeling himself as Jameer feinted left. Instinctively, the younger man countered swiftly, blocking and pivoting smoothly into a defensive stance. Jameer allowed a faint smile of approval. "Better?" Jameer acknowledged, stepping back. "Remember, stay relaxed until the moment of action." Tension clouds judgment. This was more than just self-defense. Jameer was preparing Bird for something far more dangerous. An infiltration mission they both knew might be their only shot at exposing the truth. If Jameer was going inside to gather evidence, Bird would be his eyes on the outside, the one person who knew the system well enough to blend in and get close without raising suspicion. But that meant being sharp, physically, mentally, emotionally. He was teaching Bird how to move without being noticed, how to stay calm when surrounded, how to listen to instincts forged in fire. Each drill, each movement, each correction had a purpose. "Infiltration isn't about strength," Jameer said, voice steady as he paced behind him. "It's about control, silence, timing. You won't get a second chance in there." Bird nodded, still catching his breath. The weight of Jameer's words settling deeper than the bruises already forming along his ribs. Jameer stepped in front of him again, raising his hands. Reset. Focus. One more time. And without hesitation, Bird squared his stance, ready to try again. Nearby, two other survivors, Tariq and Devon, watched carefully, absorbing every detail of Jameer's lessons. They were older than Bird, each with faces hardened by the harshness of street life, yet now alight with purpose, fueled by the chance to finally fight back. All three had narrowly escaped the hidden labor camps, carrying trauma that no words could fully capture. Jameer's voice rose softly, the calm authority born of countless missions clear in every word. Inside that facility, you'll face guards armed with weapons and brutality. You won't have the luxury of second thoughts. Every action must be precise. Devon stepped forward cautiously, his voice thick with tension. We ready for this, Jameer? I mean, we ain't soldiers. Jameer paused, understanding fully the weight behind the question. He faced Devon steadily, voice low but reassuring. You've all been soldiers from the moment you chose to survive. You've endured more hardship than most people ever will. Now, you simply harness that strength. Devon's eyes met Jameer's gratefully, nodding in silent understanding. Tariq stood straighter, determination flickering in his gaze. What's the final plan? Jameer led the men toward a large table, strewn with meticulously detailed maps and notes. He leaned over carefully, tracing routes with his finger, explaining their approach. I'll enter first, deliberately captured. They'll expect me after what happened, Jameer explained steadily. Once inside, I'll locate Zeke and gather proof, footage, testimonies, anything that will expose this. Nina Greaves will secure extraction and get the evidence out. Bird glanced nervously toward Jameer, uncertainty briefly clouding his features. How will we know you're all right in there? Jameer's gaze softened briefly. You won't. Trust your training. Trust your instincts. And trust that I'll survive. Once I'm inside, you'll move into position around the perimeter. Tariq, you'll handle communications. Devon, you and Bird create a distraction near the gate. Wait for the right moment. When the time comes, you'll know. Devon exhaled heavily, nodding slowly. We'll be there. Jameer's expression grew solemn, his voice deepening with intensity. This operation will demand every bit of courage you possess, but it will succeed if each of you remembers your training. Stick to the plan. No heroics. No improvisation. The three nodded gravely, committing his words to memory. 2 nights later, a cold drizzle fell steadily as Jameer walked alone through dimly lit city streets toward a known patrol route. His heart beat calmly despite the risks ahead, adrenaline sharpening his senses as he spotted the patrol vehicle turning slowly onto the street. He positioned himself deliberately in their path, breathing deeply, steadying himself for capture. Headlights flooded his vision abruptly, the patrol vehicle skidding slightly as officers spotted him standing defiantly in the road. Doors slammed open, weapons raised immediately. Freeze! An officer shouted angrily, eyes wide with recognition. Hands up now! Jameer obeyed slowly, eyes fixed forward, pulse steady. I'm unarmed. One officer stepped forward cautiously, pistol aimed directly at Jameer's chest, voice trembling slightly with tension. It's Dawes! Get cuffs on him! Rough hands seized Jameer's wrists, binding them tightly behind his back. They slammed him against the hood roughly, searching him aggressively. Officer Collar stepped from the shadows, face twisted bitterly, smug satisfaction glowing in his eyes. Thought you could run forever, Dawes, Collar taunted harshly. Not this time. Jameer's eyes narrowed coldly, unafraid. Your time is coming. Collar laughed cruelly, striking Jameer roughly across the face, blood trickling instantly from his mouth. Jameer merely smiled grimly in return, fueling Collar's rage further. Get this garbage loaded up, Collar barked furiously. Special delivery. Moments later, Jameer found himself shoved into a dark, reinforced van. He remained silent and still, mentally running through each aspect of the plan as the van jolted forward into the night. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly before the vehicle finally halted, doors swinging open abruptly, revealing heavily armed guards and towering fences topped with razor wire. The labor camp loomed ominously, exactly as Bird described. Dark, foreboding, and brutal. Harsh floodlights blazed down, illuminating muddy grounds littered with prisoners shuffling slowly from barracks to factory-like buildings, shoulders slumped, expressions hollow. Jameer observed every detail, committing each guard position, patrol route, and security camera angle to memory. Guards roughly pushed him forward, barking orders, weapons trained menacingly. "Move faster, Dawes!" snapped one guard, jabbing Jameer sharply between his shoulder blades with the butt of a rifle. Jameer stumbled deliberately, careful not to show his strength too soon, maintaining the appearance of vulnerability. He was quickly processed, stripped, searched, and assigned a coarse, numbered uniform, his dignity purposefully stripped away in minutes. Yet, beneath his composed exterior, burned a silent, unyielding determination. Soon, he was thrust into the holding area, a cramped concrete enclosure that reeked of despair, filled with exhausted men slumped against walls. Jameer immediately scanned their faces, seeking Zeke, heart tightening at the possibility he might already be too late. Then, in a shadowed corner, he recognized a frail, familiar figure, slouched painfully against the wall, his thin frame battered, eyes half-closed. Jameer knelt swiftly, gently touching Zeke's shoulder. "Zeke," he whispered urgently. Slowly, painfully, Zeke's eyes flickered open, recognition dawning slowly behind glazed pupils. "Jameer!" His voice was a dry rasp, barely audible. "You shouldn't be here." Jameer offered a faint, reassuring smile, concealing his own deep concern at Zeke's weakened state. "I promised I'd find you." Zeke trembled slightly, his bruised face etched with fatigue. "Be careful, Jameer. These guards, they're monsters." Jameer nodded grimly. "I've seen enough to know." Over the next few days, Jameer witnessed firsthand how deeply the cruelty ran. Prisoners were awakened brutally at dawn and forced into back-breaking labor, assembling products under constant threat of violence. Guards carried clubs and electric prods, their cruelty casually administered, striking men who collapsed from exhaustion, withholding food to punish those who dared protest. Jameer memorized every atrocity, discreetly activating the hidden camera concealed within his tattered uniform. He gathered footage of the guards' brutality, the malnutrition visible in hollow cheeks and sunken eyes, the desperation etched into every prisoner's face. Each night, he meticulously documented guard shifts and patrol routes, timing rotations down to the second, forming an escape plan as precise as any he'd ever devised in war zones overseas. Yet more vital even than gathering intelligence was restoring hope among the beaten prisoners. Quietly, discreetly, Jameer spread whispers among the captives. He passed on quiet assurances, small gestures of solidarity, meeting fearful eyes with steadfast strength. "Don't lose hope," Jameer murmured to a young man who was shaking uncontrollably from exhaustion. "We'll get out of this. Stay strong." Word quickly spread among the prisoners. A quiet resistance was forming, and Jameer Dawes, a man whose very presence radiated quiet strength, was its heart. Still, his greatest concern remained Zeke, whose condition deteriorated rapidly with each passing day. The older man was weakening visibly, each breath shallow and strained. One evening, as prisoners lined up to receive their meager ration of stale bread and thin broth, Jameer noticed Zeke missing from the line. Panic surged briefly in his chest. Carefully slipping away from the guard's watchful eyes, Jameer found Zeke slumped weakly against the barrack wall, breathing faintly, eyes closed. Jameer knelt quickly, grasping his friend's thin shoulder gently. "Zeke, stay with me," Jameer urged softly, his voice firm yet tender. "We're close. Just hold on a little longer." Zeke's eyes opened slowly, glassy with fever. "I'm tired, Jameer, so tired." "I know," Jameer replied gently, struggling to maintain his composure. But you've got to fight. The world needs to know your story, our story. Zeke managed a faint nod, his eyes shining dimly in the low light. I trust you to tell it, Jameer. No matter what happens. Before Jameer could respond, heavy footsteps approached sharply, a guard's voice booming angrily from the shadows. Hey, what are you two doing? Back in line? Jameer rose quickly, his fists instinctively tightening, but forced himself into submission, feigning compliance. The guard stepped close, sneering contemptuously, baton raised threateningly. Think you're special, Dawes? You're nothing here. Move now, before I give you a reason to crawl. Jameer offered no resistance, helping Zeke gently to his feet, steadying him carefully. His eyes, however, met the guard's fiercely, silently promising retribution. It was a gaze so intense, so filled with cold fury. The guard momentarily faltered, stepping back uncertainly before quickly regaining composure. That night, Jameer made his final preparations. Prisoners slept restlessly around him as he lay awake, mapping every step of the coming escape, visualizing each contingency. Quietly, carefully, he concealed the recorded footage in a small hidden compartment within his uniform, evidence crucial to exposing this hidden horror. Hours later, under the pre-dawn darkness, Jameer slipped from his bunk, moving silently through the barracks. He glanced briefly at Zeke, who slept uneasily, his breaths shallow yet steady. Jameer swore quietly to himself he would not leave without his friend. Pausing in the shadows, Jameer checked his watch, heart racing with adrenaline and anticipation. The hour had arrived. Soon, the perimeter alarm system would be disabled by Tariq, the gate compromised by Bird and Devon, and the prisoners freed from captivity. It would be chaos, but it would be their chaos, carefully orchestrated. Suddenly, a firm hand grabbed Jameer's shoulder from behind. He spun instantly, fist clenched tightly, ready to fight, but relaxed slightly upon seeing Bird, who had infiltrated the perimeter early. Everything's set, Bird whispered urgently. Tariq and Devon are in position. You ready? Jameer nodded firmly, eyes blazing fiercely in the darkness. Let's finish this. Bird hesitated briefly, glancing toward Zeke's frail form. He gonna make it? Jameer's jaw tightened resolutely, his voice unwavering. He has to. Bird met Jameer's determined gaze, drawing strength from the confidence he saw reflected there. Together they moved silently through shadows toward the barrack doors, hearts pounding with tension and purpose. Tonight, the hidden evil thriving beneath the city's blind eyes would finally be exposed. Tonight, justice would no longer be merely whispered. It would be shouted, undeniable and deafening. For Jameer Dawes, a soldier who had faced countless battles, this was the fight of his life. And in that moment, stepping out beneath pale moonlight, he knew with absolute certainty he would win. In the pre-dawn darkness outside the labor camp, Detective Nina Greaves sat in her unmarked sedan, fingers tight on the steering wheel, heart racing with anxiety and anticipation. She'd parked discreetly along an isolated road beneath dense foliage, carefully hidden from the occasional patrol vehicle that passed nearby. Her career hung precariously in the balance. She knew this mission could cost her everything she'd worked for. But some things mattered far more deeply than rank or badge. Checking her watch, Nina noted the precise time, each second feeling eternal. Her phone buzzed softly, a coded message from Tariq confirming communications had been disabled inside the compound. Nina exhaled sharply, gripping her radio tightly. There was no turning back now. Alpha and Bravo teams, stand by, she instructed quietly, urgency clear in her voice. Extraction on my command. Inside the compound, shadows moved swiftly. Tariq silently made his way along the outer perimeter, carefully avoiding the sweeping beams of guard towers. Reaching the main surveillance junction box, he swiftly removed its panel, exposing wires and circuits beneath his fingertips. With practiced ease, he disabled the main communication and surveillance relays, plunging the compound into a technological blackout. Surveillance is down, Tariq whispered urgently into his earpiece. You're clear, Bird. Copy! Bird responded swiftly. Nearby, Devon and Bird moved swiftly toward the reinforced front gates, carrying small explosive charges hidden inside canvas bags. Crouching in the darkness, Bird expertly placed the explosives along the hinges and lock mechanisms. Charges set, Bird whispered tensely. 30 seconds. Devon nodded firmly, ducking behind cover. They waited in tense silence as the countdown ran down, each second heavy with anticipation. Suddenly, a flash erupted in the darkness, quickly followed by deafening explosions. Steel hinges screamed and buckled as the main gate fell inward, crashing heavily to the ground, sending shock waves through the compound. Inside the prisoners' barracks, Jameer's eyes snapped open instantly, heart racing with adrenaline. He rose swiftly, shouting with fierce urgency, "Now! Move quickly! Stick together!" Prisoners surged forward, their eyes lit with determination and desperation. They spilled from barracks doors, a tidal wave of pent-up anger and long-suppressed defiance. Guards scrambled in confusion, fumbling to regain control as chaos unfolded. Jameer quickly located Zeke, supporting his weakened body carefully but firmly. "I got you, Zeke," Jameer whispered fiercely, leading him swiftly forward. Around them, prisoners overwhelmed stunned guards, fists and weapons clashing savagely. A fierce melee erupted in the central yard, brutal and chaotic. Prisoners, driven by rage, clashed furiously against heavily armed guards. Clubs, fists, and makeshift weapons collided, bodies crashing violently together beneath harsh floodlights. Jameer pushed forward resolutely, directing prisoners strategically, expertly exploiting the confusion. Yet even amid the fighting, his eyes constantly scanned for threats, acutely aware the hardest fight was still coming. Outside, Nina gripped the radio tensely, heart pounding furiously as she heard the distant explosions and shouting. "Alpha and Bravo teams, move in! Move in now!" she ordered firmly, her sedan roaring to life as tactical vehicles surged forward, racing toward the breached gate. Back inside, the fighting intensified dramatically. Gunfire rang out sharply, guards finally regrouping enough to fire indiscriminately, panic fueling reckless violence. Prisoners fell, wounded but defiant, while others pressed forward relentlessly. Jameer surged forward, guiding Zeke carefully through the carnage toward extraction. Suddenly, Sergeant Casey Flint appeared, barreling through smoke and chaos, pistol drawn, eyes wild with rage and desperation. A broad, thick-necked man in his 50s, Flint moved with the hard discipline of an ex-military enforcer, but there was no honor left in him. His uniform was soaked with sweat and grime, his sleeves rolled to reveal faded tactical tattoos, and his expression twisted with years of unchecked authority, racial contempt, and greed. As overseer of the work camps, Flint had grown fat on the suffering of others, corrupted beyond recognition by profit and power. His gaze locked onto Zeke instantly, murderously determined. "Dawes!" Flint roared bitterly, raising his weapon. "This is your fault. Say goodbye." Time slowed agonizingly as Flint squeezed the trigger. Jameer lunged instinctively, knocking Zeke aside just as a bullet ripped through the air, grazing Jameer's shoulder. Ignoring pain, Jameer launched himself toward Flint, closing the distance swiftly, eyes burning fiercely. Flint lunged forward recklessly, blade flashing menacingly. Jameer dodged fluidly, countering sharply, his elbow crashing brutally into Flint's jaw, knocking him sideways. Flint recovered quickly, swinging his blade wildly again, catching Jameer's arm lightly. Pain flared hotly, yet Jameer pushed forward relentlessly, seizing Flint's wrist and twisting viciously until Flint screamed in agony, dropping the knife to the dirt. With ruthless efficiency, Jameer drove his knee into Flint's abdomen, sending him collapsing, gasping to the ground. Flint lay helpless, eyes glazed with defeat, face twisted in disbelief. Flint fired again, narrowly missing Jameer as prisoners scattered desperately from the exchange. Jameer collided into Flint brutally, knocking the pistol from his grip, sending it skittering across the dirt. Both men grappled furiously, struggling savagely for control. Flint snarled viciously, striking Jameer hard across the jaw, but Jameer countered swiftly, driving his fist powerfully into Flint's ribs, feeling bone yield beneath the blow. Stumbling back, Flint desperately drew his combat knife, his face contorted with pain and rage. "I'll gut you like the animal you are," he spat venomously. Jameer circled calmly, his voice dangerously quiet. "You've mistaken the animal here." Before Jameer could restrain him, Flint rolled onto his side, seizing a fistful of loose dirt and flinging it desperately toward Jameer's eyes. Momentarily blinded, Jameer staggered back, furiously wiping his eyes clear. Flint seized the brief opportunity, launching upward and slamming his shoulder brutally into Jameer's chest, sending both men crashing violently into the dirt. They rolled across the bloodied ground, each fighting savagely to gain dominance, fists colliding with unrestrained brutality. Flint's fingers closed tightly around Jameer's throat, teeth clenched, eyes blazing with murderous fury as he pressed down, leveraging his full weight. Jameer gasped sharply, vision blurring as his lungs burned for air, his powerful arms straining desperately against Flint's iron grip. "Die like the rest of them!" Flint hissed venomously, pressing harder, his knuckles whitening. Jameer's world darkened around the edges, panic briefly flaring within him, instinct taking over. Summoning every ounce of remaining strength, Jameer drove his knee violently upward into Flint's lower back, striking repeatedly until Flint's grip loosened just enough. With an explosive burst of force, Jameer twisted beneath him, breaking Flint's hold and slamming his fist upward into Flint's exposed throat. Flint recoiled violently, choking, gasping desperately as he fell backward, coughing harshly. Jameer rolled aside, desperately inhaling fresh air, his bruised neck throbbing agonizingly. Both men staggered upright slowly, battered and bruised, yet each refusing defeat. The riot raged around them unchecked, prisoners clashing fiercely with guards, explosions echoing in the distance. Yet for Flint and Jameer, nothing existed beyond the brutal struggle they now faced, each determined that only one would survive. Flint charged again, fists raised furiously, his eyes wild with desperation and fury. Jameer braced himself calmly, waiting until Flint closed the distance, then countering sharply with a precise combination. Jab, cross, elbow strike, each impact brutal, bone deep, precise. Flint staggered backward, blood streaming from his broken nose, teeth clenched defiantly. "You're finished, Dawes!" Flint spat savagely, rushing Jameer again, fists flying wildly, driven now by sheer desperation. Jameer deflected Flint's reckless strikes expertly, absorbing heavy blows while returning calculated strikes that systematically dismantled Flint's defenses. His training dominated every instinct now, cold precision mixed with unyielding rage. Finally, he feinted left, baiting Flint into an unbalanced lunge. As Flint stumbled forward, Jameer struck sharply downward with his elbow, cracking it mercilessly across Flint's collarbone. The sickening snap echoed sharply, and Flint collapsed, screaming hoarsely in agony. Yet somehow, Flint rose again, eyes unfocused, arm hanging limply, breath ragged and uneven. He staggered unsteadily, hatred fueling every desperate step forward, unarmed yet determined to kill Jameer with his bare hands. Jameer's fists tightened, preparing to end the fight decisively. But unexpectedly, Flint reached swiftly to his ankle, pulling free a small, hidden blade. Jameer reacted an instant too late, the blade slicing brutally across his side, agony tearing through his body. Jameer staggered, gripping his side tightly, fresh blood seeping between his fingers. Flint grinned wildly, sensing victory near. "Not so tough now, Dawes," Flint taunted breathlessly, stepping forward shakily. "I'm going to enjoy watching you bleed out." Jameer exhaled sharply. Fighting the surge of dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him, he straightened resolutely, ignoring his pain, eyes darkening with cold fury. "You've taken your last life, Flint," he whispered harshly. "This ends now." Both men circled warily, wounds slowing them, breathing labored, bodies bruised and battered beyond normal endurance. Flint lunged forward again, blade poised lethally, but Jameer reacted swiftly, sidestepping fluidly, gripping Flint's wrist tightly and twisting sharply backward, forcing Flint to cry out and drop the blade. Jameer struck mercilessly again, repeatedly driving his fists into Flint's battered torso, each blow delivered with calculated brutality. Flint collapsed, helpless and groaning weakly in the dirt, his body finally surrendering beneath Jameer's relentless assault. Yet Jameer hesitated, standing above Flint, fists clenched, chest heaving. He stared down at his defeated enemy, torn between vengeance and mercy, memories of countless injustices flashing vividly through his mind. Flint met his gaze weakly, hatred now mixed with desperation and fear. Jameer exhaled slowly, the tension draining from his clenched fists. "You're not worth it," he muttered bitterly, stepping back slowly. Face justice instead. But Flint, driven by a final desperate burst of hatred, lunged upward once more, seizing a fallen baton and swinging it furiously toward Jameer's head. Instinctively, Jameer reacted, catching the baton inches from his face, eyes blazing with renewed fury. Without hesitation, he drove the baton brutally into Flint's jaw, knocking him unconscious instantly, leaving him sprawled helplessly in the dirt. Jameer staggered back, breathing heavily, body trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. Blood seeped steadily from his wounds, his muscles burned fiercely. Yet he stood victorious, Flint finally subdued, unable to harm anyone again. Bird rushed toward Jameer, eyes wide with concern. "Jameer, we have to move, now!" Jameer nodded weakly, accepting Bird's support gratefully. "Get everyone out quickly," he ordered firmly, his voice strained yet resolute. "Extraction's waiting." As Bird guided him carefully toward waiting vehicles, Jameer glanced back briefly at Flint's unmoving body, lying broken on the dirt. For a fleeting moment, satisfaction filled him, the brutal struggle finally over. Yet he knew clearly this victory was only partial. Collar remained free, the threat still looming ominously. Exhausted but determined, Jameer Dawes vowed silently to himself this war would not end until complete justice was achieved, no matter the price still awaiting him. Smoke billowed heavily through the darkened sky as flames engulfed the labor camp, illuminating the landscape in an eerie, pulsating glow. Sirens wailed sharply in the distance, piercing through the chaotic chorus of voices as prisoners, bruised and battered but finally free, raced desperately toward waiting vehicles just beyond the ruined perimeter. Detective Nina Greaves stood anxiously near her car, heart pounding, urgently signaling each survivor toward safety, her eyes scanning relentlessly through the emerging smoke for one man she refused to leave behind. Jameer Dawes emerged suddenly from the smoke-filled compound, his powerful frame bent slightly under the strain of his wounds, yet still standing tall. He was guiding a group of prisoners, Bird and Devon at his side, supporting the severely weakened Zeke between them. Jameer's breathing was labored, blood staining his tattered clothing, yet his eyes shone fiercely with determination, refusing to acknowledge the pain and exhaustion he felt. "Jameer!" Nina called urgently, rushing forward swiftly, relief washing across her face. Jameer carefully steadied Zeke before reaching into his torn jacket, retrieving a small digital camera containing precious footage. He handed it firmly to Nina, his voice hoarse but resolute. "Everything you need is here. Every atrocity, every crime the world needs to see." Nina grasped the camera tightly, nodding with deep gratitude. "I'll make sure they do," she promised firmly, eyes filled with respect and urgency. But we have to move. More authorities are inbound. Jameer turned quickly, signaling toward the waiting convoy of vehicles. Everyone move! Quickly now! We don't have much time. Survivors surged forward urgently, scrambling into vans and buses provided by Nina's allies. Exhaustion briefly replaced by adrenaline and hope. Bird helped lift Zeke carefully into an ambulance, paramedics immediately attending to his injuries. As Jameer prepared to follow, his instincts suddenly tightened with apprehension. Overhead, a distinct mechanical hum buzzed ominously. Small, sleek drones gliding silently above, capturing every detail of the unfolding chaos. Nina followed his gaze upward, eyes widening in concern. "They're recording us," she whispered sharply, realizing immediately the implications. Jameer nodded gravely. "We can't stop them now. Just get the footage out. Make sure our story is heard first." Nina grasped his arm briefly, urgency flooding her voice. "Be careful, Jameer. They're going to hunt you harder than ever." He met her gaze steadily, calm determination clear in his expression. "I'm counting on it." With that, Jameer quickly climbed into one of the crowded vans, directing survivors urgently as Nina slipped swiftly into her sedan, immediately uploading the incriminating footage through an encrypted channel, sending undeniable proof to trusted news sources. Her career would undoubtedly suffer, but justice mattered infinitely more. Vehicles roared to life, tires spinning urgently against muddy earth, headlights slicing sharply through darkness and smoke. Jameer carefully counted each survivor, ensuring no one was left behind, his gaze settling briefly on Zeke, now stabilized but weak, breathing softly as medics tended gently to his wounds. "You made it," Jameer whispered gently, gripping his friend's thin hand briefly. "Rest now. It's finally over." Zeke's weary eyes flickered weakly open, gratitude and relief clear behind the fatigue. "Because of you, Jameer," he rasped softly. "Don't ever forget that." Jameer squeezed his hand reassuringly before turning forward, eyes narrowing sharply. The drones hovered persistently above, their presence an ominous reminder that this fight was far from over. Collar remained free, dangerous, ruthless, and now undoubtedly desperate. As vehicles sped swiftly from the burning compound, flames rose higher behind them, consuming every trace of cruelty and exploitation hidden within its walls. Yet Jameer felt no satisfaction, only renewed resolve. This battle was won, but the war still loomed fiercely ahead. Miles away, Nina quickly entered a secure building, footage safely uploaded and already transmitting globally. As she watched screens displaying undeniable truths, guards abusing prisoners, the brutal treatment of innocents, Flint's violent command, she knew clearly the story would spread uncontrollably. There would be outrage, investigations, accountability demanded. She'd taken a dangerous risk, exposing corruption that reached higher than she'd imagined. Yet, for the first time, hope outweighed fear. Back inside the speeding convoy, Jameer leaned back wearily, injuries now impossible to ignore, exhaustion finally catching him. Bird sat quietly beside him, expression carefully guarded, but eyes burning with quiet pride. "You did it," Bird said softly, voice thick with emotion. "You gave us a chance." Jameer shook his head slowly, humility evident despite his strength. "We did it, Bird, all of us together. And we're not finished yet." Bird nodded solemnly, recognizing clearly the battle ahead. "Collar won't rest." "No," Jameer agreed quietly, determination steady in his voice. "Neither will we." Within hours, footage from the hidden labor camp spread explosively online and through news broadcasts worldwide, shocking millions who watched the undeniable evidence unfold. Public outrage erupted rapidly, protests flooding city streets, demanding justice. Calls poured relentlessly into government offices, citizens unwilling to accept excuses or denial. Jameer watched silently from a safe house provided by Nina's trusted contacts, eyes following each broadcast intently. He saw Flint's battered face displayed prominently, his crimes exposed plainly, the public now aware of exactly what had occurred beneath their noses. Yet Collar remained absent, still hidden from accountability. A dangerous loose end Jameer could not ignore. A soft knock sounded at the door. Nina entered cautiously, her expression cautiously optimistic yet weary. "They've arrested Flint. Politicians are scrambling, heads will roll," she reported quietly. "But no sign of Collar yet." Jameer nodded slowly, unsurprised, yet disappointed. "He's out there, waiting. He'll retaliate." Nina stepped closer, sincerity clear in her eyes. "Whatever happens next, you won't face it alone. People finally see the truth. They won't turn away now." Jameer exhaled slowly, accepting her words silently, grateful for her courage and loyalty. "We made a difference," he acknowledged quietly, voice filled with quiet pride. She smiled faintly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did. You reminded us justice still matters." As Nina left quietly, Jameer remained alone, contemplating the long road still ahead. Pain radiated through his battered body, fatigue heavy upon him, yet within him burned an unyielding resolve. Tonight, they'd exposed horrors hidden behind lies and silence. Tonight, they'd reclaimed dignity stolen from the powerless. Yet Jameer knew clearly his mission was not complete until Collar faced justice fully. Jameer Dawes stood slowly, ignoring pain and exhaustion, eyes narrowing fiercely. The war he'd waged against corruption and cruelty had reached a turning point, and he would see it through to the very end. Justice was no longer a distant hope. It was inevitable, unstoppable, and Jameer would make sure of it. The city awakened in outrage. Dawn broke over streets filled with thousands of protesters chanting fiercely, their voices unified in demands for justice. News of the leaked footage had ignited a firestorm that swept rapidly through every corner of society. Signs bearing images of battered survivors rose defiantly above crowds. Slogans condemning the city's cruelty painted starkly in bold letters. People marched tirelessly, determined not to rest until accountability was absolute. In a secure hotel room overlooking the downtown protests, Jameer Dawes stood silently, arms crossed, watching the sea of faces below. His wounds, freshly dressed, still ached deeply, yet the pain felt distant, overshadowed by the determined cries for justice echoing upward. Beside him, Detective Nina Greaves reviewed a thick stack of documents and testimony she'd painstakingly prepared for the grand jury. Nina glanced at Jameer, sensing his quiet turmoil. "This is only the beginning," she reminded him softly, her voice filled with conviction. "They'll hear every word." Jameer nodded slowly, eyes remaining fixed on the streets. "They deserve answers and justice." "They'll get both," Nina assured firmly. "And Collar will pay." At that moment, Nina's phone buzzed sharply. She quickly answered, expression immediately tense as she listened carefully. After a brief moment, she hung up, urgency deepening her features. "They've located Collar," Nina informed sharply. "He's hiding at a cabin just outside the city. Tactical teams are moving in, but—" Jameer straightened quickly, his eyes narrowing fiercely. "He won't surrender easily." She nodded gravely. "They want you there. He demanded it. Refuses to talk unless he sees you." Jameer's jaw tightened resolutely. "Then, let's end this." Hours later, Jameer stood silently near the tactical van, armored officers cautiously surrounding the isolated cabin. Dense trees loomed ominously around the clearing, shadows lengthening beneath a heavy gray sky. From inside, Collar's voice shouted angrily, defiant and desperate. "I won't talk to anyone but Dawes," Collar yelled bitterly, his voice echoing sharply. "Send him in, or it ends here." Jameer stepped forward slowly, raising his hands to signal the officers, calm determination guiding his every movement. "I'm here, Collar. Let's finish this." After a tense silence, the cabin door creaked open. Officer Brent Collar emerged just enough to be seen, pistol gripped tightly in shaking hands. His face was sunken, haggard, eyes bloodshot, and wild with desperation, but the fire of hatred still burned fiercely as his gaze locked onto Jameer. "You did this," Collar hissed bitterly. "Destroyed everything I built." Jameer met his gaze evenly, voice low and resolute. "You destroyed yourself, Collar. This ends now. You think it's over? You think you've won?" Without warning, Collar stepped back, allowing Jameer into the cabin. The moment he did, he raised the pistol and fired wildly. The deafening crack echoed off the wood-paneled walls. Jameer dove aside just as the bullet shattered a wooden beam above his head. Tactical officers outside braced for breach, but Jameer's voice roared out over the radio. "No! Hold your fire! He's mine!" Collar tossed the empty weapon into the corner and charged, rage twisting his features as he barreled into Jameer. Their bodies slammed into the walls, knocking over a table and scattering debris as fists flew with raw violence. Jameer took the first hit, a wild right hook to the jaw, but absorbed it, responding with a brutal knee to Collar's ribs. The force staggered him, but Collar didn't slow. He lunged again, slamming Jameer into a shelf stacked with dusty gear, wooden crates crashing to the ground. "You don't belong here," Collar spat, breath ragged. "You never did," Jameer answered with a headbutt that split Collar's lip wide open, sending blood spraying. Collar reeled, but came back hard, delivering a hammering elbow to Jameer's side, followed by a vicious uppercut to the gut. Jameer grunted, breath knocked from his lungs, but stayed grounded, eyes locked in. The fight turned savage. Close quarters, no room for error. Collar lunged, trying to grapple him to the ground, but Jameer twisted, redirecting the momentum to flip him hard over his hip, slamming him onto the wooden floor. The cabin shook with the impact. Collar scrambled to his feet, grabbing a broken chair leg and swinging it like a club. Jameer ducked, caught the weapon mid-swing, and snapped it in two with a swift elbow strike. He followed with a punishing combo: jab to the throat, hook to the jaw, elbow across the cheek. But Collar wouldn't fall. Snarling, he tackled Jameer again, dragging him into the far corner of the room. They rolled across the floor, fists slamming into ribs, knees driving into each other's sides. Jameer locked Collar's arm and twisted, but Collar bit into his shoulder through his shirt, forcing Jameer to release just long enough to shove him off. Both men broke apart, rising slowly, bloodied and breathing hard, bodies bruised and aching. "You can't beat me," Collar spat, wiping blood from his mouth. "I am this system." Jameer's eyes burned. "Then it's time to tear it down." With a roar, they clashed again, fists smashing into flesh, each blow thunderous against the cramped cabin walls. Collar drove a punch into Jameer's ribs, twisting sharply to land maximum force. Jameer grunted, then snapped his palm into Collar's chin, followed by an elbow hook to the temple. Collar staggered sideways into a cabinet, sending its contents crashing. "You don't get to walk away from this," Collar snarled, blood dripping from his jaw. "Not after what you exposed." Jameer's voice was steady, cold. "I didn't expose it." "You did. Every time you put a boot to someone's throat." Collar charged again, aiming low, trying to sweep Jameer off his feet. Jameer pivoted, grounded himself, and caught Collar in a clinch, delivering two sharp knees to his side before Collar broke free with a desperate forearm across the face. The blow staggered Jameer. Blood streamed down his cheek. Collar grabbed him, hauling him toward the stone hearth and trying to slam him into it. Jameer resisted, twisted, then reversed, driving Collar headfirst into the wall beside the fireplace. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Collar growled through clenched teeth, trying to recover. "You're just another body waiting for the dirt." Jameer didn't answer. He slammed his head backward into Collar's nose with a sharp crack. Collar cried out, stumbling. Jameer turned, launched a spinning back fist, and sent him flying into a wooden table that splintered beneath him. Both men stumbled, soaked in sweat and blood, clothes torn, knuckles raw. "You led them into cages," Jameer said darkly. You called that protection? Collar roared, grabbing a fire poker from beside the hearth and swinging it wildly. Jamir ducked, stepped inside the arc, and trapped Collar's arm. He twisted it violently until the weapon clattered to the floor, then swept Collar's legs from beneath him, slamming him down hard. But Collar rolled with the fall and kicked upward, catching Jamir in the gut, sending him back a step. He scrambled up, throwing a barrage of punches, fast, desperate, accurate. Jamir blocked, parried, left, right again, then fired a sharp blow to Collar's neck, followed by a brutal hook to the temple. This time, Jamir dropped to a knee from a counterpunch that landed clean. Collar charged. Jamir sprang upward from the crouch, driving his shoulder into Collar's chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him onto the hardwood floor. He mounted him and unleashed hammer fists, raw and punishing, blood spraying with each impact. Collar twisted, grabbing Jamir's shirt, dragging him into another roll. Now, Collar was on top. He pinned Jamir's arms and drove his forearm across his throat, choking him, eyes wide with desperation. Jamir's legs coiled, locking around Collar's waist, and with a sudden thrust, he flipped them again, slamming Collar against the floor. Breathing hard, Jamir rose to his knees, pressing one firmly into Collar's chest. "Give up!" Jamir barked, voice hoarse. "It's over!" Collar's face twisted in rage, teeth bared. "Never! You think cuffs and trials fix this? They'll bury the truth just like they always do." Jamir's fist hovered in the air, trembling with fury. Not this time. Not with the world watching. Collar suddenly swung upward with a last-ditch punch, catching Jamir across the jaw. Jamir reeled, and Collar used the moment to roll free, grabbing a shard of broken wood from the cabin's shattered wall. He slashed it like a blade, grazing Jamir's side, ripping through fabric and skin. Jamir winced, but stayed on his feet, catching Collar's wrist, twisting it brutally until the makeshift weapon clattered to the ground. He used Collar's own momentum to spin him, trap him in a rear chokehold. Collar thrashed wildly, trying to break free, but Jamir's arms tightened with surgical control, squeezing until the fight bled out of the man inch by inch. "End it!" Collar choked. "Do it! Kill me!" Jamir didn't move, holding him just long enough for the fight to drain completely from his limbs. Then he shoved Collar face first into the floor and held him there. Not to kill, but to show him exactly how helpless he'd become. Tactical boots splashed through the clearing as officers rushed in, weapons lowered, expressions stunned. Jamir rose slowly, chest heaving, bloodied but unbroken. "It's over," he said, and this time, no one argued. Nina entered swiftly behind them, eyes widening with relief and gratitude at seeing Jamir still standing. "You did it," she breathed quietly. Jamir nodded slowly, exhaustion heavy, yet satisfaction evident. Now, justice can be served. Sunlight streamed through tall courtroom windows, illuminating the polished wooden benches packed with reporters, survivors, families, and concerned citizens. Cameras focused silently on Jamir Dawes as he calmly approached the witness stand. His movements steady, expression solemn. Despite healing wounds still visible beneath his tailored suit, he carried himself with a quiet dignity, drawing immediate attention from everyone present. The room fell silent, anticipation heavy in the air. Detective Nina Greaves, seated near the front, offered Jamir a supportive nod. He acknowledged her quietly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeply upon his shoulders. This was not simply testimony. This was truth, justice, and the voice of thousands silenced too long. Jamir raised his right hand firmly, repeating the solemn oath. He then took his seat, turning calmly toward the prosecutor, prepared to speak clearly and directly to the jury. "Mr. Dawes," the prosecutor began respectfully, "can you please state your full name and background for the record?" "My name is Jamir Dawes," he replied, his voice steady and clear. "Former Commander Jamir Dawes, United States Army Delta Force. I served 15 years, primarily in special operations overseas. A quiet ripple passed through the courtroom. Eyes widened, murmurs exchanged. Few had expected the quiet, dignified man they'd seen portrayed negatively in early news reports to possess such an honorable past. Commander Dawes, the prosecutor continued carefully, can you describe the circumstances under which you first encountered Officer Brent Collar? Jameer's eyes hardened slightly, though his voice remained calm and controlled. Officer Collar led a systematic campaign of violence against homeless citizens, specifically targeting black individuals. I first encountered him when he was brutally assaulting an elderly man named Ezekiel Simmons, known affectionately as Zeke. He paused briefly, recalling that night vividly. Collar's aggression was unprovoked, violent, and intentional. When I intervened, I became a target. But Zeke was not Collar's only victim. Dozens more were forcibly taken, exploited in hidden facilities operating under the guise of rehabilitation programs. The prosecutor stepped closer, eyes carefully sympathetic, yet professional. And you investigated these facilities personally? I did, Jameer affirmed resolutely. I infiltrated one of the camps to gather evidence. The conditions were horrific. Forced labor, malnutrition, routine beatings. Officer Collar was not just complicit. He was actively involved in orchestrating and profiting from this abuse. The courtroom hung onto every word. Nina watched proudly, knowing Jameer's courage would finally dismantle Collar's lies. When the defense took their turn, Collar's attorney approached Jameer aggressively, intent on shaking his credibility. Commander Dawes, he began sharply, isn't it true you attacked Officer Collar and his men during lawful police operations? Are you not, in fact, guilty of violence against law enforcement? Jameer met the attorney's gaze evenly, calmly refusing to be provoked. My actions were purely defensive, protecting innocent lives. Collar and his men were not enforcing law. They were breaking it. Officer Collar maintains he was cleaning up dangerous streets, the attorney pressed harshly. He argues that removing criminals and homeless individuals benefited public safety. What do you say to that? Jameer's eyes narrowed slightly, his voice becoming quietly fierce. Innocent people are not criminals because they're poor or vulnerable. Collar labeled them as such to justify atrocities. True justice protects everyone, not just those in power. A wave of quiet applause briefly swept the courtroom before the judge restored order. Collar, seated with his legal team, clenched his fists tightly, visibly seething yet trying to maintain a thin mask of composure. But beneath the surface, rage and pride waged war with humiliation. Collar himself took the stand shortly afterward, his posture stiff, jaw set, shoulders squared as if still wearing the badge he had disgraced. He spoke confidently at first, trying to reframe the narrative with hollow authority. I did what was necessary, Collar claimed firmly. These camps were rehabilitation centers, removing dangerous elements from society and providing valuable labor training. Commander Dawes is a violent criminal who attacked law enforcement and endangered public safety. He paused, glancing toward the jury as though seeking validation. You think I wanted this job? He continued, voice rising, cracking slightly under pressure. You think I liked dealing with trash? No one else had the stomach for it. They let the filth spread. Tent cities, crime, drugs, and I cleaned it up. We gave them structure, order, purpose. His words, meant to justify, rang hollow, ugly in their brazenness. They were never going to contribute. They had nothing. We made them useful. And if a few broke along the way, that's the cost of order. That's reality. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even his own attorney stiffened slightly. I gave them discipline, food, shelter. You call it cruelty? Fine. But don't pretend they were saints. Dawes is the real criminal here. He broke into a facility, attacked officers, and spread propaganda. Yet, Collar's mask faltered under relentless questioning. When prosecutors introduced Jameer's meticulously gathered footage, The entire courtroom fell into stunned silence. Gasps followed as the first clips played. Guards striking emaciated prisoners, trays of rotting food thrown into dirt. Men and women shackled, collapsing from exhaustion. In several scenes, Collar stood nearby, either giving orders or watching indifferently. The truth had a face now, and it was his. Survivors took the stand next, their voices shaking but unwavering. One by one, they painted a vivid picture of what life inside the camps had truly been. Forced labor under threat of violence, medical neglect, verbal abuse, sleep deprivation. They spoke of friends who had disappeared and never returned, of rules that changed daily, of hopelessness manufactured by design. Each word drove a deeper wedge into Collar's carefully constructed lie. His gaze shifted downward. His hands fidgeted. Public perception shifted dramatically as the trial continued. Media outlets reported Jameer's story with gravity and admiration. His decorated military past, his quiet strength, the painful journey from service to the streets, and the fierce dignity with which he stood against corruption. His humility made headlines. His restraint, his focus on justice over vengeance, elevated him in the eyes of a wounded nation. Outside the courthouse, a growing wave of supporters gathered each day. Protesters held signs bearing Jameer's name. Some carried photographs of the camps, others wore shirts with the words, "Truth doesn't stay buried." Across TV networks and news feeds, Jameer became more than a man. He became a symbol, and yet he remained focused. He gave no speeches. He accepted no titles. When reporters approached, he pointed them toward the victims, the ones still healing, still piecing their lives back together. The spotlight meant nothing to him. Justice was his only goal. When the jury finally delivered a swift, decisive verdict, guilty on all charges, a wave of emotion surged through the courtroom. Cheers erupted inside and out. Journalists scrambled to capture the moment. Families cried. Strangers embraced. Collar sat stunned. Disbelief and rage etched plainly across his face. His lips trembled, nostrils flaring as the gravity of his defeat settled on him like cold steel. His lips trembled, nostrils flaring as the gravity of his defeat settled on him like cold steel. For the first time, he seemed small, powerless, finished. As the bailiff stepped forward to place the cuffs on him, Collar broke his silence one last time, muttering bitterly under his breath. "You think this changes anything? You think they won't find someone else to take my place? This world doesn't want your kind in charge, Dawes." Jameer, seated calmly across the room, met his gaze with quiet certainty. "That's where you're wrong. It already has." And with those final words, justice sealed its victory. In the days following, Jameer visited Zeke at the recovery center, finding his friend sitting quietly outside beneath gentle sunlight, looking far healthier than he'd been weeks earlier. Zeke smiled warmly upon seeing Jameer approach. "You did it, Jameer," Zeke said softly, eyes filled with gratitude and pride. "You gave us justice." Jameer gently squeezed his friend's shoulder, modesty clear in his quiet smile. "We did, Zeke. Together." The city began healing, survivors finally receiving support and care they desperately needed. Nina tirelessly championed reforms within the police department, public support overwhelmingly behind her. Jameer continued advocating quietly, speaking only when necessary, his quiet strength reinforcing each message. At a large community gathering weeks later, hundreds gathered to honor survivors and activists who'd courageously fought injustice. Jameer stepped quietly onto the stage, the crowd instantly erupting into cheers. Raising a hand for quiet, he spoke softly yet firmly, his words resonating deeply. "I stand here today not as a hero, but as a man who believes dignity and justice belong equally to every person. My experiences taught me the measure of a society lies not in how we treat those with power, but in how we care for those without it. I fought because I couldn't stay silent, because silence becomes complicity." His eyes moved across faces in the crowd, humbled yet resolute. Justice demands courage, not just from one person, but from us all. Together, we've shown what's possible when we refuse to accept cruelty. But our work isn't finished. It must continue every day, in every decision. Applause thundered powerfully. Jameer stepped back quietly, his heart full of gratitude, pride, and cautious optimism. Change had finally arrived, inspired by courage, fueled by truth. Standing proudly among his community, Jameer Dawes recognized clearly the importance of his journey. Painful, yet necessary, his identity now revealed, his dignity unquestioned, he became a living reminder that justice required constant vigilance and unwavering resolve. As Jameer stepped off the stage, shaking hands with survivors, activists, and citizens who thanked him sincerely, he knew this moment marked not the end, but a powerful beginning. A commitment he would carry forward proudly for the rest of his days. Sunlight gently painted golden hues across the rooftops of a once broken neighborhood, now showing signs of renewal as Jameer Dawes and Zeke Simmons stood proudly in front of a newly constructed community shelter. The freshly painted sign above the entrance read clearly in bold letters, "Zeke's Place. Hope lives here." They'd chosen the name together, a quiet but powerful tribute to the journey they'd shared and the lives they had fought so fiercely to protect. Jameer turned toward Zeke, who stood leaning slightly on a cane. His health vastly improved, though age and hardship still marked his gentle face. Zeke's eyes shone warmly as he gazed upon the shelter, emotion clear in his soft voice. "Never thought I'd see something like this, Jameer," Zeke murmured softly, gratitude and wonder filling his expression. "This place, it's everything we dreamed it would be." Jameer nodded thoughtfully, glancing around at volunteers eagerly preparing for the grand opening. "It's just the start, Zeke. There's still a long road ahead, but every step forward matters." Zeke squeezed Jameer's shoulder affectionately. "Couldn't have taken that step without you, Jameer. Folks are finally listening, finally seeing us." As they spoke, Detective Nina Greaves approached, wearing a crisp uniform adorned with insignia marking her recent promotion to captain. Her determined efforts to root out corruption recognized publicly and proudly. Her eyes met Jameer's, filled with quiet pride. "Jameer, Zeke," Nina greeted warmly, admiration clear in her voice. "I brought someone who wanted to see this place for himself." From behind her stepped Bird, dressed neatly and carrying a backpack, his youthful face now brightened by confidence and newfound purpose. Bird smiled shyly, stepping forward to embrace Jameer tightly. "I start classes next week," Bird announced proudly, his voice filled with genuine excitement. "Community college, criminal justice. I figure maybe someday I'll wear a badge too. Make sure what happened to us never happens again." Jameer smiled proudly, gently patting Bird's shoulder. "You'll be one of the good ones, Bird. We're counting on you." Bird nodded earnestly, determination evident. "I won't let you down, Jameer." Volunteers and residents gathered quietly around the small group. Conversations hushed respectfully as Jameer stepped forward to address them. His voice carried softly yet powerfully through the crowd, each word measured with quiet dignity. "Thank you all for being here today. This place, Zeke's Place, is more than just shelter from the streets. It's proof that change is possible when we refuse to ignore suffering. Our journey has been difficult. We've faced cruelty, injustice, and corruption. But together, we've also found strength, courage, and hope." Jameer paused briefly, glancing toward Zeke with deep respect. "We named this place after Zeke because he taught me something crucial. Every single life matters. Every person deserves dignity. This shelter belongs to everyone who's ever felt forgotten. Here, nobody stands alone." Applause echoed warmly, heartfelt and powerful. Jameer stepped back humbly, allowing Zeke to take his place at the microphone. Zeke smiled gently, gripping the cane tightly, yet standing tall. Jameer's too modest, but truth is, he's our quiet hero. Zeke said sincerely. We built this together. But Jameer gave us courage, even when hope felt impossible. Remember this moment, because today marks the start of a future we never thought we'd see. The shelter's doors opened, welcoming in individuals who once believed the city had forgotten them. Jameer and Zeke greeted each person personally, learning their names, offering warmth and respect in every handshake. Nina and Bird joined them, each playing their part to ensure this day marked lasting change. In the weeks and months that followed, the city continued transforming, not overnight, but steadily. As systems long broken were rebuilt carefully and fairly, policies changed. Accountability became standard practice rather than an afterthought. Captain Nina Greaves remained fiercely committed to reform, overseeing new training and accountability standards within the police force, determined to restore trust one honest action at a time. Bird excelled at school, passionately embracing a future he'd once believed impossible. Driven by memories of the suffering he'd endured, he frequently returned to volunteer at Zeke's place, mentoring others, proudly sharing his journey to inspire younger residents that a brighter future remained within their grasp. Zeke himself spent his days quietly caring for residents, offering wisdom born from experience and compassion. His strength and kindness made the shelter a true home for countless individuals seeking refuge and renewal. Jameer continued advocating quietly, attending community meetings, providing insights, ensuring voices of those who'd suffered remained at the forefront of every discussion. Yet, as time passed, he found himself drawn again toward quiet reflection, stepping back gradually to let others continue the work he'd begun. One gentle evening, beneath streetlights softly glowing, Jameer stood at the shelter entrance, observing quietly from the shadows as volunteers assisted new arrivals. A small smile briefly touched his lips. Seeing Zeke warmly welcoming a frightened young mother and child into the safety of the shelter reminded Jameer clearly why he'd fought so fiercely. Silently, he stepped away, slipping unnoticed into the bustling city streets. He moved quietly among the crowds, unrecognized yet intimately connected to their lives. This time, he was not hiding, not running, but watching, guarding silently from afar. He would remain always ready, quietly vigilant, ensuring justice and dignity remained secure. Jameer Dawes had never sought praise, only justice. He had learned deeply the battles worth fighting were often quiet, unnoticed. Change happened slowly, patiently. One act of kindness, one gesture of courage at a time. The city slowly rebuilt itself on foundations Jameer and his allies laid quietly yet firmly. New systems rose, fair, compassionate, just, replacing cruelty and corruption. Jameer walked silently through the streets he'd reclaimed, comforted seeing people no longer afraid, no longer forgotten. Though Jameer eventually disappeared from public view, he remained always present in spirit, an unspoken protector, a symbol of resilience and quiet strength. Occasionally, stories emerged among residents, tales of a silent guardian watching over the city. Unseen, yet always felt, Jameer Dawes became legend, not for the violence he'd endured, but for the courage he'd shown, the lives he'd quietly restored, and the quiet strength he inspired in others. And so the city changed, not overnight, but one system, one person at a time, until justice was no longer a distant hope, but a daily truth quietly carried forward by those who remembered. Jameer Dawes watched from afar, proudly, peacefully, quietly protecting a city that now finally belonged to all its people. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.